Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me back here in Point Lookout for another interesting location. So I thought after the previous one I would do some more of the locations in Point Lookout because I think they're very interesting. But most of it's very, very creepy, but I think it's really quite interesting. So we might be out of October now, but for people in the Fallout universe, the horror doesn't really have a time limit on it. So we're going to visit Turtledove Detention Camp today, which is a military clearance area and trespassers will be shot, so be wary. It's definitely an uncomfortable story, what happened at this camp, so I will say up front there is a trigger warning for mentions of torture, but there's nothing too specific mentioned, but it is something that's going to be part of the discussion today, so just so that everybody's aware of that. So it's right in the very top of the map of Point Lookout, so the Ark and Dove Cathedral off to the east there, and yeah, you can hear there's crickets and frogs and things, so we can kind of start to see it coming into view ahead here. There's a lot of radiation here and there's a lot of nasty enemies. So the detention camp was operated during the Sino-American War to detain and interrogate suspected Chinese spies, which I'm guessing is what these people were here for. It was mainly operated by the US Marine Corps, and there's a concrete building in the centre, which is that one there. And that's kind of the admin building, and then two wooden buildings that act as housing for prisoners, which we can't really get into here. I can open the gate, seek through, so yep, that might be the kind of intake building there. You can see there's watchtowers and things posted. I don't think we can get into these buildings, but there is, that gave me a fright there. There are ghouls around here, and if you're a high enough level you can sometimes run into reavers here. Yeah, there's one there. There is also robotic security somewhere as well. But yeah, I've got combat off so that I can, you know, just kind of talk about what's happening. So that's the admin building there, and then we've got some wooden buildings that act as housing with a lovely doorless outhouse for going to the bathroom. I think we can go into bunkhouse A here. So got first aid box. So there is a little bit of loot here, but you can see, I mean, that's 4 bunk beds crammed in to this one tiny room. Someone that died there, and then more dead people, and 4 more bunk beds, so sleeping 8 people in this tiny room, so very cramped. There is a stealth boy, which is handy, and a bunch of other random loot, but yeah, really cramped conditions. I don't really know what happened to this person. Somebody had a crutch there. Not pleasant, you know, so that's definitely not very nice. Assuming that the other bunkhouse is the same, and then yeah, there's another one here, and then there's also some interrogation rooms. So again, similar kind of situation. We've got these bunk beds and people are just crammed in like sardines. Very unpleasant, you know, but that's kind of the way these things go. Yes, I know, I see all you scary ghouls, you're terrifying. And they also had these interrogation rooms, which I think are these ones here, which we can get into. So, chair and a table, and then a gurney. We've got some surgical instruments, bone saws, stim packs, leather belt. Yeah. Floodlights, so you can imagine that potentially some pretty horrific things took place in these interrogation rooms. Not nice to think about. Yeah, we'll get back to that, but yeah, you can see there's watchtowers around as well. The fence has kind of started to collapse now, unfortunately. There's a generator in here, so yeah, probably using some kind of electric shocks as a form of interrogation. Lovely. Yeah, not pleasant. And yeah, there's some turrets, there's watchtowers dotted about, so obviously security was tight. They wanted to make sure that nobody escaped. Understandable, I guess. And you know, it's not something that's that unusual. You know, obviously prisoners of war, things like that, tend not to be treated very nicely for a number of reasons. But this is obviously the admin building, and this would be where they kept all their, you know, weapons for keeping the place secure. So there is a good haul of kind of ammo and weapons and first aid kits and whatnot in here, which is really useful. We've got a terminal there, which I think might yield something interesting. And then bathroom. Oh, somebody died in the bathroom. Okay. Let's have a quick look at this terminal. Oh, we've got some combat armour. So yeah, there's a lot of good kind of loot here. Nothing sort of too specific, but yeah. So we've got some reports about what happened here. So underneath this building, which we will go into shortly, there's a morgue, which apparently saw a fair bit of use, as we'll see when we get down there. There's a retort for cremation of the deceased, and there's also a drainage channel that was left open but monitored, possibly on purpose to try and tempt detainees to try and escape so that they could be caught in the act and punished severely. So that's nice. So you might be wondering why they needed an in-house morgue. So we can have a look at these. So this one here mentions the escape route. So suspicious activity after lights out. Prisoners apparently snuck into morgue overnight, not to apprehend them before reporting the event. We've known for some time about a septic runoff access point in the basement, which would be a good candidate for escapees. The runoff flows southwest of the camp about a quarter of a mile or so. We'll keep a low profile about this and post guards in the area. They could make their break any night. Meanwhile, I'll try and find an excuse to send somebody down there and check it out without arousing suspicion. I'd rather catch them in the act. But yeah, there's some reports missing from this log, and then we've got the interrogation reports. So these are kind of interesting. You know, in these detention camps, people obviously were put in pretty horrible conditions, treated poorly, war never changes, you know, all of that stuff. So similar to another one that you can find in Fallout New Vegas at Little Yangtze and Big Mountain, where again, Chinese American prisoners were subjected to experiments by the mad scientists, and then again by Father Elijah when they become ghouls and he was testing out the bomb collars on them and that kind of thing. So all very pleasant, of course. But the terminal entries here about the interrogation reports, I think, do hint at some of what's happened. So we've got John Doe, the submariner. So John Doe, obviously, if you don't know, is the name. It's kind of a default name that's given to a male person who's not been identified, often either a victim of a crime or somebody that is dead, and they don't have any ID on them, so they don't know who the person is. So they call them John Doe for a male or Jane Doe for a female. And that's what that is. So obviously they haven't found out this person's name. Spent another session in interrogation room B with the surviving crew member from the Chinese spy sub Navy is attempting recovery on. This guy is demonstrating extraordinary fortitude for a relatively low-ranking grunt. Can't say the Chinese don't make good soldiers out of their boys. I'm sure this one would have gone the same way as his skipper if the cyanide capsule in his molar hadn't been a dud. So obviously a lot of the spies and things were given cyanide pills hidden so that they could use them in the event of capture, so that they weren't subject to horrible interrogation methods. But for this guy, he was the last survivor of the downed sub SSN 371A, which is part of the Velvet Curtain quest. But his cyanide capsule didn't work, so he wasn't able to kill himself, and then was subjected to this interrogation. And then so we requested method B, interrogation clearance, so putting that through to Quantico for that in the morning. So they don't mention what interrogation method B is, but if they need authorization to use it on a prisoner, it has to be something pretty horrible and something pretty brutal, I would think. And then we have Agent Wan Yang, who is a person of interest and a suspected communist. So Agent Yang actually does have the self-destruct codes for the submarine that we were talking about, hidden in a dental capsule that the people here never found. So that, again, it's part of the Velvet Curtain quest, where you take on Agent Zhang's mission to destroy the submarine. So you need to come here to find Yang's body at the morgue, which we will get to in just a second. So Yang was arrested locally and succumbed under Method D interrogation during the afternoon. Must be pretty severe if it was capable of killing someone. But the medical examiner called in and verified a natural cause of death for the records, which clearly isn't the case, but who cares about the truth, right? They never actually found the codes though, so but this tells us that Agent Yang is downstairs in the morgue in one of the lockers where they put the bodies of the deceased. But apparently running out of space down there and need to do an early disposal this quarter. So that's interesting. There is also notes on here about Agent Zhang, which is this one. So federal agencies have added a new person of interest. So if you come here first, you get the quest from this terminal entry. To watch list, so Dr. Zhang is a Chinese national defector. Naturalization agents in Norfolk processed his defection after jumping over from a merchant ship he was stowed away on. Zhang was apparently in communication with a US naval intelligence contact for some months prior, reportedly brokered an immunity deal in exchange for his help recovering intelligence from the downed submarine off our coast. Staying at room 1D in the Homestead Motel off the boardwalk. So that's the motel that's just there where you come off the boat when you arrive in Point Lookout. So forbidden from issuing a search warrant against this location, but authorised to monitor his activities in public. So this person has basically offered to be a spy, to defect from the Chinese, to spy. But as we learn, they turn out to be a double agent, actually. But Agent Zhang died before completing the mission, so all very interesting and unpleasant. It's an interrogation method, has to be pretty severe if it is capable of causing people to die. So, a lot of horror everywhere. But let's check out the morgue, because that's always a fun place to be. I haven't seen any of the robots. There's normally supposed to be robots roaming around here, like sentry bots and things, but they've decided not to arrive today. We've just got the ghouls, which could have been soldiers or prisoners potentially of the camp that have been left here. Hard to say. But yep, we come downstairs into the morgue. So obviously we've got operating table and things. Not quite sure why there's gas, because you don't really need oxygen for dead people. So a whole bunch of medical supplies, typewriter, telephone, usual sort of thing. And then we've got the drawers where all the bodies are kept. This is the drainage channel, and this is the retort. So this will be where obviously they cremate the people when they need to do a disposal run, which is a lovely turn of phrase when we're talking about human beings, but so yeah, it's definitely a creepy place. So there we go, Agent Yang, we can slide this out. So that is Agent Yang's resting place. This person has scissors. So yeah, there's still a few. I think there's only 3 that are occupied by skeletons. Yeah. But you can't find anything off Agent Yang until you do the quest, and you find out that they have the codes hidden in a dental capsule, but the people here never discovered it either. So it's a very creepy place, for sure. We're in the middle of the swamp. There's, mist everywhere, and then we saw that bubbling sort of gas that's like the toxic gases that are bubbling up from the ground. It's a torture camp for suspected spies, which is something that does happen, has happened, and probably will happen again. And their interrogation methods definitely have to be questionable if they only refer to them by a designation of a single letter. If it was something that wasn't against the Geneva Convention, they'd state outright what it was. So these methods must be pretty brutal, and we could see from the interrogation rooms that there was, a generator and things. So using electricity to torture people, it's not an unusual thing. It's happened. Could be very effective for causing pain, that kind of thing. And the people that are in charge of the camp refuse to really make any public statements to the press or to diplomats about, anything. So we go back into the admin building. There was, I believe... Oh, no, I didn't mean to do that. Wrong button. Is it this? Yeah, so public release. So they did do a bulletin about this person of interest. And have a bit of a history about Agent Yang, but you can see that it's been redacted. So, intelligence reports have been redacted and edited. How they found, and they've declined comments to the press and diplomats. So, Department of Defence Relations to give advice regarding a public statement about it. They've falsified death reports, so when people have died under duress, the death has been marked as natural when it almost certainly wasn't natural. It was caused by their interrogation methods. And it's not really a huge surprise that there's something like this happened, when nations are at war, like what happened between China and America in this timeline. It's something that has been known for a long, long time. You've got stories of things like the water torture, the thumb screws, putting on red hot iron boots and making someone dance in them or walk in them. It's happened in history a lot where people have been tortured like that. They've had experiments done on them against their will, and much, much worse. And we do know this from history, and hopefully most of us can learn from it to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. And I'm not just talking about that failed Austrian painter with the silly moustache either. Many nations, many people have been guilty of doing some horrific things in the name of national security and warfare and whatnot. And I think that's what makes this place so uncomfortable. I mean, the whole atmosphere of Point Lookout is very creepy and uncomfortable in general, and it's supposed to be, it's definitely supposed to be something that makes you feel quite scared. There's creepy dolls hanging everywhere, and the locals are not exactly the most friendly. There's ghouls everywhere, all that kind of thing. But, obviously some horrible things were done to people in this place that were so bad that they needed an on-site morgue and crematorium in order to kind of deal with the results of these methods. And coming here is dangerous now, even in 2277. As you can see, there's a lot of ghouls here. Some of them are wearing armour, so I've got to assume that at least some of these ghouls are former soldiers that were stationed here and then became ghouls after all the radiation got in, after the bombs fell and whatnot. There's a reaver there. Maybe some of the other ones are prisoners that were still alive when the bombs fell, who knows. But, you know, there's quite a lot of kind of generic loot. There's some good weapons, lots of ammo kicking about and things like that. You can find the stealth boy, and you can pick up a mini nuke as well. The rads are also kind of high around here, so that's something to bear in mind. Again, not a surprise. We've got ghouls that they tend to congregate where there's radiation. Makes sense. And it's the chimney from the crematorium, which is lovely. So generally you'll come here because you're doing the Velvet Curtain quest, which is for you follow Agent Zhang's kind of last mission to blow up the submarine, and that is very rewarding as well. You can find an awful lot of good loot if you follow that quest to its conclusion and survive it. So it's definitely worth the effort, in my opinion. You can get a lot of good stuff out of it, but coming here is dangerous. I say there is supposed to be robot security, but I have not seen any robots anywhere, just the ghouls, so I don't know what happened there, but I'm sure the last time I played this and came here there was definitely some nasty robots kicking around as well. It's a military installation, you would expect that. But yeah, again, it's just another way of kind of highlighting the horrors of war and the kind of things that, you know, humans will do to each other in the name of national security and the name of war. It's the true story of the way the world is and the way the world has been. It's, you know, when they say war never changes, it's really kind of pointing that out, that, you know, no matter how advanced the technology gets, at the end of the day, it's still really about, you know, people doing horrible things to each other in the name of trying to sort out their differences. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's still people that are always going to end up getting hurt. I don't know how they got up to this this location, but, you know, and it's really... yeah, it's quite a sad one, because I bet, you know, clearly some of these people were actually spies, but there's probably a good number of them that weren't as well, and they had nothing to do with it, and they just happened to be of Chinese descent. But, you know, if they... it doesn't necessarily mean that they're on the same side as the, you know, in the war and things like that, but... you know, it's the way these things go, and it's horrific, and it is uncomfortable, and it should be uncomfortable to think about these things, because, you know, the world kind of keeps repeating the cycle over and over again, and, you know, we're seeing a lot of things happen in the world right now that are equally as horrible, except, you know, this is a video game, it's all fiction, so it's not really, you know. But whereas when it's happening in real life, that's real people that you're talking about that are enduring horrific situations, where oftentimes they don't actually deserve it. So something to think about anyway. And I think this location really kind of highlights that, you know, that they've just been crammed into these tiny little shacks with basically no space, and then subjected to some interrogation methods that are so horrific that nobody wants to actually specify what they are, until they died, and then they were just cremated and kind of forgotten about. So yeah, let me know what you think. If there's any other sort of locations in particular that you'd like to see me cover, I would love to hear it in the comments. I do think there's quite a few interesting places around Point Lookout, so I think I might focus on this for the next few weeks, and try and explore some other interesting locations, because I think Point Lookout is really one of the best DLCs. The one that I forgot last time was the Pit as well, which I think is also very, very interesting. And now that I'm wrapping up the Robotics Expert series and the Science of Fallout, we're going to be covering Liberty Prime on Saturday. So next week we're going to look at some of the humanoid creatures and the mutated humans that we have encountered across the game. So I know I did talk about ghouls briefly in the Immortality series, but I'd like to kind of get into a bit more detail about the ghouls, how they came about, and the difference between the feral ghouls versus the non-feral ghouls, that kind of thing. And then you've got things like there's the trogs, there's the marked men, the tunnelers, and a bunch of other ones. I made a list anyway, but you know, there's a lot of these kind of things still to talk about, and I think that's going to be very interesting, so hopefully you'll come back for that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.